The stars had always called to Park Yuna. As a child growing up in a small coastal town, she would sit on the roof of her grandmother's house and watch the night sky for hours. Her grandmother would bring her warm tea and tell her stories about the moon rabbit and the bridges between worlds. Now, 30 years later, Yuna floated among those very stars as the lead xenobiologist aboard the diplomatic vessel Aegis Dawn. She never imagined the stars would become her prison. The attack came without warning. One moment, the Aegis Dawn was traveling through neutral space on a peace mission. The next, Velthari warships surrounded them like wolves circling wounded prey. The Velthari were an ancient species, reptilian in form, with scales that shifted colors based on their emotions. They had been at war with the Galactic Coalition for centuries, and they did not believe in prisoners. But today, they made an exception. Yuna remembered the cold hands that dragged her from the ship. She remembered the screams of her crewmates as they were separated and taken to different holding cells. She remembered the face of Lieutenant Kang Taeho, the security officer, as he fought against 6 Velthari guards to reach her. He failed. They all failed. The Velthari homeworld was a place of red deserts and black mountains. The sky burned orange even at night, lit by 3 moons that hung like watching eyes. Yuna was taken to a facility deep in the mountains, a research station where the Velthari studied their enemies. She was placed in a habitat, a large enclosed space with artificial grass and a small pool of water. It was designed to look peaceful, but Yuna knew better. This was not a home. This was a cage. High Counselor Draven visited her on the 3rd day. He was tall, even by Velthari standards, with scales the color of dried blood. His eyes were yellow and cold, like a snake watching a mouse. "Human," he said, his voice a low hiss. "Do you know why you are still alive?" Yuna did not answer. She had learned that silence was sometimes the wisest response. Draven smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Your species fascinates us. You have no claws, no venom, no armor. You are soft and weak. Yet somehow you have spread across the galaxy like a disease. We want to understand why." "We survive," Yuna said quietly. "That is what we do." Draven laughed. It was an ugly sound. "We shall see how long you survive what comes next." The next morning, the doors to her habitat opened. 3 creatures walked in, and Yuna felt her heart stop. They were Rethkai. She had read about them in classified coalition files. The Velthari bred them as living weapons, predators engineered for one purpose: to kill. These 3 were cubs, not yet fully grown, but each one was already the size of a large dog. They had 6 legs, scales as black as midnight, and eyes that glowed with soft blue light. Their claws could cut through steel, and their teeth were designed to crush bone. The cubs spread out, circling Yuna slowly. They moved like shadows, silent and deadly. Their eyes never left her. She could see their muscles tensing, ready to pounce. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to run, to hide, to do something. But Yuna did not run. She had spent her entire career studying alien creatures. She had touched beasts that could kill with a look and calmed animals that had never known kindness. She understood something that the Velthari did not. Fear was a language, and these cubs were fluent in it. If she ran, they would chase. If she screamed, they would attack. That was what predators did. They responded to fear because fear meant prey. So Yuna did the one thing the cubs did not expect. She sat down on the grass, crossed her legs, and began to hum. It was an old song, a lullaby her grandmother used to sing on those nights when they watched the stars together. The melody was soft and simple, rising and falling like gentle waves. Yuna closed her eyes and let the music fill the air. The cubs stopped circling. The largest one, a male with a scar across his snout, tilted his head. He had never heard a sound like this before. It was not a cry of pain or a scream of terror. It was something else entirely, something strange, something new. In the observation room above the habitat, Counselor Draven watched with growing confusion. The human was not fighting. She was not dying. She was sitting in the grass, making soft noises, while three of the deadliest creatures in the Empire stared at her like curious children. "What is she doing?" one of the scientists asked. "I do not know," Draven admitted. His scales had turned a pale gray, the color of uncertainty. "But I intend to find out." Below, the largest cub took a step closer to Yuna, then another, then another. He lowered his massive head and sniffed her hair. Yuna did not flinch. She kept humming, kept her eyes closed, kept her breathing slow and calm. The cub made a sound. It was soft, almost questioning, like a child asking for permission. Yuna slowly raised her hand and touched the side of his face. The scales were warm, not cold like she expected. She could feel the powerful muscles beneath the skin, the heartbeat that pulsed with ancient fire. But she could also feel something else, something the Velthari had missed in all their engineering and breeding. She felt loneliness. These cubs had been created to kill, but they had never been taught to live. They had never known a gentle touch or a kind word. They were weapons, and weapons were not loved. Until now. "Hello," Yuna whispered. "My name is Yuna, and I am not afraid of you." Days passed in the habitat, and the Velthari scientists watched in growing disbelief. The human woman should have been dead. The Rethkai cubs were not pets. They were not capable of mercy or affection. They had been designed in laboratories, their genes modified over hundreds of generations to remove any weakness, any softness, any trace of connection. They were perfect killers, nothing more. Yet there she was, sitting in the artificial grass with all three cubs gathered around her like puppies waiting for attention. Yuna had learned their personalities quickly. The largest one, the male with the scar, was bold and protective. He always positioned himself between Yuna and the door, watching for threats. She named him Baram, which meant wind in her grandmother's language, because he moved so fast and silent. The second cub was a female, smaller than her brother, but faster and more clever. She liked to hide in shadows and watch before acting. Yuna called her Gyu Rim, meaning shadow, because she seemed to melt into darkness whenever she wanted. The third was the youngest, barely more than a baby despite his size. He was playful and curious, always sniffing at new things and making soft, chirping sounds when he was happy. Yuna named him Nuri, which meant world, because everything in the universe seemed to amaze him. The names were important. The Velthari had given the cubs numbers, designations for tracking in their research files. But Yuna knew that names meant identity, and identity meant belonging. When she called them by their names, they responded. When she spoke to them softly, they listened. When she touched the sensitive spots behind their ear ridges, they closed their glowing eyes and made sounds that were almost like purring. She taught them small things. She taught Baram that he did not need to bare his teeth every time someone approached. She taught Gyu Rim that it was okay to come out of the shadows and be seen. She taught Nuri that his curiosity was a gift, not a weakness. In return, they taught her things too. They showed her which parts of the habitat had the warmest sun. They brought her small creatures from the artificial ecosystem, gifts of food that they expected her to share. At night, they curled around her in a protective circle, their warm bodies keeping away the cold of the alien world. One evening, as the 3 moons rose above the transparent dome of the habitat, a young Velthari scientist named Sarath entered the observation room. She was different from the others. Her scales were a soft green, the color of new leaves, and her eyes held something that most Velthari lacked: curiosity without cruelty. The human has been with the cubs for 12 days, Sarath reported to Counselor Draven. All 3 subjects remain healthy. No attacks have occurred. Draven's scales rippled with irritation. That is impossible. The Rethkai do not bond. It is not in their genetic programming. Perhaps the programming was incomplete, Sarath suggested carefully. Or perhaps humans have abilities we do not understand. Draven turned to look at the viewing screen. Below, the human woman was teaching the smallest cub some kind of game, rolling a ball of packed grass across the ground and laughing when Nuri pounced on it like it was alive. She is manipulating them, Draven decided. Tricking them somehow. We must separate them and study the cubs individually. Sarath hesitated. Counselor, with respect, I believe that would be unwise. The cubs have shown unprecedented behavioral changes. If we remove them from the human now, we may lose valuable data. Data, Draven hissed. These creatures were bred to fight in our armies, not to play games with enemy prisoners. They are defective now, contaminated by human weakness. Or strengthened by human connection, Sarath said quietly. There are reports from across the galaxy, Counselor. Stories of humans bonding with species that should be hostile to all life. They kept predators as companions on their homeworld. They call them pets. They loved them, and the creatures loved them back. Draven made a sound of disgust. Love. A primitive emotion. It has no place in war. But Sarath was not so sure. She had studied humans longer than anyone in the facility. She knew things that Draven refused to accept. Humans were not weak because they lacked claws and venom. They were strong because they found strength in others. They built families not just from blood, but from choice. They adopted the lost and healed the broken and turned enemies into friends. It was terrifying when Sarath really thought about it. The Velthari conquered through force and fear, but humans conquered through something far more dangerous. They conquered through love. Below, in the habitat, Yuna felt the cubs pressing closer to her as the night grew cold. Baram rested his heavy head on her lap. Gu-Rim curled against her back like a living shield. Nuri had fallen asleep with his nose pressed against her hand, his breath warm and steady. She thought about her crew, scattered across this alien world in cells and cages. She thought about Lieutenant Kang Tai-Ho, who had fought so hard to protect her. She thought about her grandmother, who was probably looking at the stars right now, wondering where her granddaughter had gone. I will find a way out of here, Yuna whispered to the sleeping cubs. And when I do, you are coming with me, all of you. Baram opened one glowing eye and made a soft, rumbling sound. It was not a growl. It was acknowledgement, agreement, promise. The Velthari had sent these cubs to break her. Instead, they had given her something precious, a family. And Yuna had learned long ago that there was nothing more dangerous than a human protecting their family. The stars outside the dome seemed to shine a little brighter that night. Somewhere out there, rescue was coming. Yuna could feel it in her bones. She just had to survive long enough to meet it. The order came on the 15th day. Counselor Draven had grown tired of watching the human make fools of his scientists. The Rethkai cubs were supposed to be weapons, not companions. They were supposed to inspire fear, not curl up like sleeping children at the feet of a soft-skinned alien woman. This experiment had failed, and Draven did not tolerate failure. Remove the cubs, he commanded. Take them to the reconditioning chambers. We will erase whatever contamination the human has caused and restore them to their proper function. 6 handlers entered the habitat the next morning. They wore armor made from the scales of fallen Rethkai, symbols of their authority over the beasts they controlled. Each one carried a shock prod capable of delivering enough electricity to drop a full-grown predator. Yuna was sitting by the small pool when the doors opened. She looked up and saw the handlers, and she understood immediately what was about to happen. "No," she said, rising to her feet. "You cannot take them." The lead handler laughed. His name was Voreth, and he had been breaking Rethkai since before Yuna was born. "You think you have a choice, human? Step aside or you will be moved." But before Yuna could respond, Barum moved first. The largest cub planted himself between Yuna and the handlers. His scales rippled from black to deep red, a warning color that Yuna had never seen before. His lips pulled back to reveal rows of teeth that gleamed like obsidian knives. A growl rose from his chest, so deep and powerful that the handlers felt it vibrating in their bones. Gurim appeared from nowhere, sliding out of the shadows to take position at Yuna's left side. Her eyes blazed with cold blue fire, tracking every movement the handlers made. She was coiled like a spring, ready to explode into violence at the slightest provocation. Nuri, the youngest and most playful of the three, climbed to the top of the habitat's tallest structure. He opened his mouth and released a screech so loud and sharp that several handlers stumbled backward. It was a hunting call, a sound that had been programmed into their prey instincts through millions of years of evolution. The handlers froze. They were trained professionals who had faced countless Rethkai, but they had never seen anything like this. The cubs were protecting the human. The cubs were choosing the human over their own kind. "What is happening?" Voreth demanded, his confidence cracking. "Why are they not responding to commands?" In the observation room above, Sarath watched with wide eyes. "They have bonded," she whispered. "Truly bonded. The cubs see her as pack, as family. They will not let her be harmed." Draven's scales had turned black with rage. "Then we will use force. Activate the shock prods. Maximum setting." The handlers advanced, their weapons crackling with electricity. Baram roared and charged at the nearest one, moving faster than any creature that size should be able to move. His claws sliced through the handler's armor like paper, and the Velthari fell screaming to the ground. Chaos erupted. Gurim attacked from the shadows, her teeth finding the weak spots in the handler's armor with surgical precision. Nuri leaped from his perch and landed on another handler's back, his weight driving the Velthari face first into the dirt. But there were too many handlers, and the shock prods were finding their marks. Baram howled in pain as electricity surged through his body. Gurim stumbled, her legs giving out beneath her. Even brave little Nuri collapsed, his young body unable to withstand the assault. Yuna watched her family fall, and something inside her broke. She ran to Baram and threw herself over his body, shielding him with her own flesh. The shock prod struck her back, and pain exploded through every nerve, but she did not move. She could not move. She would not leave them. "Stop!" Sarath's voice echoed through the habitat's speakers. "Counselor, you must stop this." Draven silenced her with a gesture. "Continue. Remove the cubs. If the human interferes again, eliminate her." But Voreth hesitated. He stood over the human woman, watching her cradle the unconscious cub in her arms. She was crying, her tears falling onto Barum's dark scales. She was speaking to him in her soft language, words that Voreth did not understand, but somehow felt in his chest. She was not begging for her own life. She was begging for theirs. In a cell block on the other side of the facility, Lieutenant Kang Taiho heard the commotion through the ventilation system. He had been listening carefully for weeks, learning the rhythms of the prison, mapping the guard rotations in his mind. Now he heard something new, Velthari voices filled with fear and confusion. "Something is happening," he said to the other prisoners in nearby cells. "Something they did not expect." Through the whisper network that prisoners always created, the story spread. The human woman, the predator cubs, the impossible bond that defied all Velthari science and logic. Hope began to grow in places where it had nearly died. Back in the habitat, Vorith made a decision that would change everything. He lowered his shock prod and stepped away from the human woman. "No," he said. Draven's voice crackled through the speakers. "What did you say?" "I said no, counselor." Vorith looked at the cubs, at the human, at the blood on his hands. "The Rethkai have made their choice. I will not force them to break it. Some bonds are sacred even to us." He turned and walked out of the habitat. After a long moment, the other handlers followed. Draven stood alone in the observation room, his scales flickering through a dozen colors of fury. The human had not just survived, she had converted his own people to her side. This could not stand. "If the cubs will not leave her," Draven declared to the empty room, "then we shall see what happens when true death comes for them all." He reached for his communication device and gave the order that would summon the adult Rethkai. The ground shook when the adult Rethkai entered the habitat. Yuna had spent the night healing her cubs. Their wounds from the shock prods were not serious, but they were weak and frightened. She had sung to them until they slept, her voice hoarse but steady. She had promised them that everything would be okay, even though she did not know if that was true. When the massive doors at the far end of the habitat began to open, she knew the promise had been a lie. The adult Rethkai was a nightmare made flesh. It stood 3 meters tall at the shoulder, its body covered in scales that seemed to absorb light itself. Its 6 legs ended in claws the length of swords. Its eyes burned with ancient hunger, the gaze of a creature that had been engineered to feel nothing but the need to kill. This was not a cub. This was death walking. Bahram struggled to his feet, still weak from the fight with the handlers. He placed himself in front of Yuna just as he had before, but this time his growl was uncertain. He knew what this creature was. He knew he could not win. Gurim and Nuri pressed against Yuna's legs, trembling. They were brave. But they were children facing a monster from their worst nightmares. In the observation room, Counselor Draven smiled for the first time in days. "Now we shall see the truth," he said. "When real danger comes, the human will abandon the cubs to save herself. All creatures are selfish at their core. She is no different." Saroth said nothing. She gripped the edge of the control panel so hard that her claws left marks in the metal. Below, the adult Rethkai advanced slowly. It was in no hurry. It had killed 17 handlers in its lifetime, soldiers and scientists who had thought themselves safe behind armor and weapons. It had never been defeated. It had never known fear. And now it had been given new prey. Yuna watched the creature approach, and she felt the familiar weight of terror pressing down on her chest. Her body screamed at her to run, to hide, to do anything except stand here waiting for death. But she looked at the cubs clustered around her, these children who had chosen her as their family, and she knew she could not leave them. She stepped forward. "Yuna, no!" The voice came from the observation room speakers. Saroth had found a communication channel, desperately trying to stop what was about to happen. "You cannot fight an adult Rethkai. No one can." Yuna did not stop walking. She moved past Bahram, past Gurim and Nuri, placing herself between her cubs and the massive predator. She had no weapons. She had no armor. She had nothing but her own fragile human body and the stubborn courage that had carried her grandmother through wars and famines and all the hardships of a difficult life. The adult Rethkai stopped. Its head tilted slightly, studying this small creature that dared to approach it without fear. This was wrong. Prey was supposed to run. Prey was supposed to scream. This thing was doing neither. Yuna stood before the beast and looked up into its burning eyes. She could smell its breath, hot and sharp like smoke from a volcano. She could see the intelligence there, buried deep beneath layers of engineered aggression. This creature was not mindless. It thought, it felt, it chose. "Hello," Yuna said softly. "My name is Yuna." The adult Rethkai made a sound that shook the walls of the habitat. It was a warning, a promise of violence, a declaration that this small thing would die very slowly and very painfully. Yuna did not flinch. "I know you can understand me. I know you were made to kill. But I also know something else." She raised her hand, slowly, carefully, giving the creature every chance to strike her down. "I know that you are alone." The adult went very still. "They made you to be a weapon," Yuna continued, her voice steady despite the tears running down her face. "They made you to feel nothing but hunger and rage. But weapons do not get tired. Weapons do not dream. Weapons do not look at the moons and wonder what lies beyond them." She took another step forward. "You do all those things, do you not? You feel things they never programmed you to feel. And it hurts, because you have no name for those feelings. No one ever taught you the words." The adult Rethkai lowered its massive head. Its eyes, which had burned with hunger moments ago, now held something different. Confusion, uncertainty, pain. Yuna placed her hand on its snout. The scales were rough and warm, vibrating with the creature's racing heartbeat. She could feel its breath washing over her, could see her own reflection in its dark eyes. For a long moment, nothing existed except the two of them, human and beast, connected by a touch that should have been impossible. "You are not alone anymore," Yuna whispered. "I am here, and I will never abandon you." The adult Rethkai closed its eyes. A sound escaped its throat, something between a growl and a whimper. It was a sound that no Velthari had ever heard, because no Velthari had ever thought to listen for it. It was the sound of loneliness ending. Behind Yuna, the cubs crept forward cautiously. Baram was the first to approach, touching his nose to the adult's leg in a gesture of greeting. Go Rim followed, then Nuri, until all four Rethkai stood together around the human woman who had somehow become the center of their world. In the observation room, Draven stared at the screen in disbelief. His perfect weapon, his ultimate tool of destruction, had surrendered to a creature it could have killed with a single swipe of its claws. "Impossible," he whispered. "This is impossible." Sarath turned to face the council members who had gathered to watch. Her scales had shifted to bright gold, the color of triumph. "Do you understand now?" she asked. "Humans are not weak. They are pack bonders. They form connections across species barriers we cannot even imagine. And once they form those bonds, they will fight and die and kill to protect them." She looked back at the screen, at the human woman surrounded by four of the deadliest creatures in the galaxy. "This is not a weakness. This is the most dangerous thing in the universe." Draven had no response. For the first time in his long life, he had no idea what to do next. But Yuna did. She looked at her family, all four of them now, and she smiled. "We are going home," she said. "All of us. Together." The escape began at midnight. Lieutenant Kang Taeho had spent 3 weeks planning this moment. He had memorized guard rotations, learned which doors were weakest, discovered which Velthari soldiers could be bribed and which ones needed to be avoided. But even with all his preparation, he knew the plan had one fatal flaw. They had no weapons, no armor, and no way to fight through an entire military facility. Then Sarath came to his cell with access codes and a message. "The human woman," Sarath said quietly. "She has done something impossible. If you want to save your crew, you must reach her first. She has protection now, protection that will follow her anywhere." Taiho did not understand what she meant, not until he led 5 of his crewmates through the dark corridors of the facility and reached the habitat where Yuna was being held. He entered the door code that Sarath had provided, and the metal doors slid open to reveal something that stopped him in his tracks. Yuna stood in the center of the habitat, surrounded by 4 massive predators. 3 of them were the size of large dogs, their scales black as night and their eyes glowing with soft blue light. The 4th was enormous, a creature of nightmare and legend that Taiho recognized from intelligence briefings, an adult Rethkai, the deadliest hunter in Velthari space. All 4 of them were looking at Yuna like she was the most important thing in the universe. "Took you long enough," Yuna said and smiled. Taiho opened his mouth, closed it, and shook his head in amazement. "How?" he managed to ask. "I will explain later. Right now, we need to move." Yuna turned to the creatures around her and spoke to them in soft, gentle tones. "Baram, Gurim, Nuri, Hanol. We are leaving this place. Stay close to me, protect the others." The cubs made sounds of acknowledgement. The adult, whom Yuna had named Hanol, meaning sky, rumbled deep in its chest and moved toward the door. It was ready. The escape through the facility was chaos. Alarms screamed as soon as Taiho's group was discovered missing. Guards rushed through corridors, weapons raised, ready to put down the human prisoners who dared to defy the Velthari Empire. They were not ready for what met them. Hanol moved like a force of nature. Guards who stood in the way were thrown aside like toys. Those who tried to fight found themselves facing a creature that no weapon could stop. But the truly terrifying thing was that Hanol did not kill unless there was no other choice. The great beast was protecting, not hunting. It was clearing a path for the small human woman who walked behind it. The cubs worked together like a trained unit. Baram took point, his keen senses detecting threats before they appeared. Gurim slipped through shadows, disabling power systems and security cameras. Nuri stayed close to the human crew members, his young body placing itself between them and any danger. Counselor Draven received the reports in his command center and felt something he had not experienced in decades: fear. "The adult Rethkai is with them," his generals reported. "It is leading the escape. Our soldiers refuse to engage it directly." "Then use the heavy weapons," Draven commanded. "Destroy the beast." "We cannot, Counselor. The sacred texts forbid the killing of a bonded Rethkai. If we strike it down, there will be riots in the streets. The people will turn against us." Draven slammed his fist against the control panel. The humans had turned his greatest weapon against him. They had used love, that primitive and disgusting emotion, to steal the heart of a creature that was never supposed to have one. The escape party reached the landing bay where the Velthari kept their captured ships. The Aegis Dawn was there, damaged but functional. Taiho rushed to the controls while the rest of the crew secured the vessel. But they were not alone. Draven had come himself, bringing his personal guard of 50 elite soldiers. They surrounded the ship, weapons aimed at the humans and the Rethkai who protected them. "Enough!" Draven declared, stepping forward. His scales were pure black now, the color of death. "You have caused enough chaos, human. Surrender now, and I will make your execution quick. Resist, and I will make you watch as your creatures are torn apart, one by one." Yuna walked forward, past Taiho, past the soldiers, until she stood face to face with the counselor. The cubs flanked her, and Hanol loomed behind her like a mountain of shadow and fury. "You do not understand us," Yuna said quietly. "You never have. You think we are weak because we feel. You think we are foolish because we love. But that is exactly why you will lose. You are one woman with 4 beasts," Draven scoffed. "I have an army." Yuna smiled. It was not a cruel smile, but it was not kind either. It was the smile of someone who knew something that her enemy did not. "On my world," she said, "we took wolves and made them dogs. We took wildcats and let them sleep in our beds. Every creature that showed us trust, we loved until they loved us back. We did not conquer through force. We conquered through connection." She looked at the soldiers surrounding her, at the fear in their eyes. Your people are not so different from ours. They know what they saw in that habitat. They know that your weapons are not as strong as what I have built." Behind Draven, his soldiers began to waver. They had heard the stories. They had seen the recordings. They had watched a human woman tame the untamable, befriend the friendless, and turn their greatest weapon into a loyal guardian. Vorith, the handler who had refused to separate Yuna from the cubs, stepped forward from the ranks. "She is right, Counselor. The Rethkai have chosen. And perhaps it is time we made a choice as well." One by one, the soldiers lowered their weapons. Draven stood alone, his empire crumbling around him. He reached for his own sidearm, determined to end this himself, but Hanul moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. The great beast pinned the counselor to the ground with one massive paw, its burning eyes staring into his terrified face. "Hanul," Yuna said softly. "Let him go." The adult Rethkai hesitated, then stepped back. It had made its choice. It chose mercy because that was what Yuna had taught it. The Aegis Dawn lifted off from the Velthari homeworld an hour later. The crew was weak and wounded, but they were alive. They were free. Taiho found Yuna in the cargo bay, surrounded by her family. The cubs were sleeping in a pile, exhausted from the long night. Hanul stood guard at the door, watching the stars through the viewport with ancient, wondering eyes. "How did you do it?" Taiho asked. "How did you bond with creatures that were never meant to bond?" Yuna was quiet for a moment. She stroked Baram's scarred snout, feeling the warmth of his breath against her hand. "On Earth," she said, "we took wolves and made them dogs. We looked at creatures with teeth and claws and killing instincts, and we saw something more. We saw partners. We saw friends. We saw family." She smiled, and for the first time since her capture, she looked truly at peace. "The Velthari thought they were testing my fear. They wanted to see if I would break." She looked out at the stars, at the infinite possibility stretching before them. They were actually testing theirs. Behind her, Hanul made a sound that might have been agreement. The cubs stirred in their sleep, moving closer to the human who had given them something they never knew they needed: a home, a family, a reason to live beyond killing. And somewhere across the galaxy, Yuna's grandmother looked up at the night sky and smiled, though she did not know why. Perhaps she could feel it. That ancient connection between hearts that distance could not break. Her granddaughter was coming home, and she was not alone.